Good evening. I'm Councillor Alan Law. I'm the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Commission. So welcome to those of you who are in the council chamber and those of you who are participating remotely by Zoom. Members of the commission present this evening are councillors Jeff Brooks, James Cole, Tony Linden, Steve Masters and Tony Vickers. And I believe Councillor Adrian Abbs, I see him now, is joining us via Zoom. Other members in attendance, I don't see them. I'm expecting Eric Pattenden and I'm expecting Richard Sumner. I see Councillor Richard Sumner. We have an echo.
I don't think Chairman Councillor Pattenden is going to be with us. I spoke to him earlier and he didn't say he was.
Thank you. There's an echo when you were speaking, an echo when I'm speaking. Is someone, can you just check that you've turned off the, everyone's muted on the system? Okay. I've got to report that we were expecting Councillor Ross McKinnon to arrive and to present, in fact, lead off on the background to the call-in from the executive meeting on York House. Unfortunately, Ross has just called me about 10 minutes ago with the bad news that his wife has been taken to hospital with severe chest pains. So we can all imagine that OSMC takes a step back in priorities into Ross's current situation. So we hope everything is, it's just a mild scare of some kind and nothing too serious. But I think you'll all agree I can pass my wishes on to Ross and his wife. Councillor Tom Marino may also be joining us later. Now, we've got a number of council officers present to advise and support. We're supposed to have the chief executive, although I don't see him yet. We've got Joseph Holmes, Executive Director Resources, Eric Owens, Acting Executive Director Place, Paul Coe, who's the Service Director Adult Social Care, Sarah Clark, who's the Service Director of Strategy and Governance, is on my right, and she's the Monitoring Officer. John Winstanley, Service Director for the Environment, Paula Goodwin, who's the Service Lead for HR. We're supposed to also have Richard Turner, but I don't see him. And Nick Caprara is the Housing Strategy Development Manager. Gordon Oliver is the clerk of the meeting this evening, and the meeting's been live streamed via YouTube. And Vicky Phoenix, over to my left, is the Zoom host tonight. Now, before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held over Zoom and with councillors present in the meeting room. The meeting has been live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone participating in the meeting, particularly tonight where there's other things that could distract us, to make sure they switch their phones off and their microphones and switch their microphones on when invited to speak, and to switch them off when finished speaking. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, it'll be for rail. There's no drill planned. And the assembly point is the Dolphin Car Park, I think we all know about. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a note in, I think, part 2, we sort of come back to the items called in. So how do you plan to manage part 1, the call in, and part 2, the confidential piece?
Can we leave that until we get there? I will certainly answer that because I intended to address that right up front. Okay. So if I can go through the agenda. Item 1, apologies. Gordon.
Yes, we've had apologies from councillors B, Loco and Claire Rolls.
Thank you. Minutes of the meeting. Can we look at the minutes of the meeting from the 6th of September? I don't intend to go through them page by page. Has anybody got any comments that they would like in terms of accuracy or omissions? Can I therefore accept? Can I have a proposer for that, please? Councillor Cole, second.
I'll second it.
Councillor Vickers. And I'll sign those in a second when the meeting's over. Thank you. Okay. And then actions from the previous meeting. Gordon, do you want to make any comments?
So just some things to note. Action 70, Councillor Sumner has struggled to find a mutually convenient date to meet with Thames Water, but they are actually re-engaging at the moment and hope to set up a meeting shortly. Action 75, we just need to confirm with Eric Owens and Councillor Sumner if anything has actually been done regarding lobbying for removal of the automatic right of developers to connect to the water companies' networks. And then Action 79, there's the lack of employment number, data on employment numbers. So the team has been struggling to provide the data in the form requested. Just wanted to know if there's anything that's further that OSMC would like to ask the economic development team to do in terms of engaging the top 10 employers, or are we happy with for this action to be closed?
As I was the one that raised that last one about the top 10, I'm happy that the economic development team is following up on it and doing their best. It's very difficult when you say to I'd like you to keep a regular contact with the top 10 businesses, and it can be interpreted as anywhere, the size of business, number of employees, and I think they're struggling on that. But they're struggling to define it, but they are working on it. So I'm happy to close it, but if you want to keep it open, I'm equally happy. What's the feeling? Councillor Brooks?
Prefer it open for one more time.
Okay, leave it up. Fine, thank you. I'm happy to do that. Everyone else? Good. Okay, move on to item 4.
Chairman, I have a hand up.
I'm sorry.
On another
I'm
item. Sorry,
I'm
I
sorry.
think Adrian has as well on the.
Yeah, I do. I see that. Yeah.
To raise my real hand up.
If you're in the chamber, that would be, but we do have.
Understood.
Yeah.
No, on action number 76, I'd just like to be clear that when it talks about amount of water used in new build can be limited, it implies in the brackets that it's limited to 120 litres. That is the current sort of standard figure. I wouldn't want it to be implied that that's as low as you can go. That's all. I don't know whether currently, if the word currently was put in front of 122 litres, that would be better. Yeah, I think you take the point, do you?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Anybody else? You're happy to do that? Okay. Fine, we'll do that. Councillor Abs.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Chairman. More of a statement. First of all, I do want to give my apologies for not being there in person. I think it's incredibly important to turn up to meetings where voting is required, and if it wasn't for a medical condition that's stopping me being there, I would be there for sure. All I would ask, I know the rules are definitely that if you're remote, you are not able to vote. But previously, we have taken indication votes before a vote to at least help the rest of those present with an indication. I just hope that would be possible this evening, Chairman.
Candidly, I don't know. I need to be guided because I know the rules changed. I need to be guided by the monitoring officer on this.
Chairman, you can permit an indicative vote if it's at your absolute discretion. So if you think it would add anything, you can allow that. Kind of councillors participating remotely who are members of the committee could ask that the committee note how they would have voted. So I think that is within your discretion.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. That's most appreciated.
Now, go on to declarations of interest. Anybody got any declarations of interest? Councillor Vickers.
Just the property we're looking at in the call-in is in my ward, that's all.
Okay.
I have no other interest in it, but.
Councillor Abs.
Same declaration, Chairman.
Thank you. No others? Fine, thank you very much. Item 5, petitions. I'm not aware of any, are we?
No petitions received, Chairman.
No petitions, fine. So we'll rapidly move on therefore to item 6, which is the call-in of the executive decision on York House from the 30th of November 2022. OSMC has been asked to consider the member call-in of this executive decision. The call-in was made by councillors Lee Dillon and Alan McCrow, Jeff Brooks, Tony Vickers, Eric Pattenton and Adrian Abs, who have all been invited to be present for the call-in. But as you know, we have 2 in the room and 1 on Zoom. I'm going to ask, I was going to ask Councillor Ross McKinnon who's the Executive Portfolio for Economic Development, to lead off. But as I previously announced, he is indisposed. So I'm going to ask for the Executive Director for Resources, Joseph Holmes, to give a brief overview of the proposed course of action in relation to the disposal of York House. Next, I will invite the members who called in the decision to present their reasons and their proposed alternative course of action. I will then go back and ask officers to respond. Then I'll go to individual members who can make comments or ask further questions of either the officers, the portfolio holder, or the call-in members. After all of that, we will then move to the vote as outlined in the papers on 2.2. But members are advised that the meeting may need to move to a part 2 discussion if it is likely that there would be a disclosure of exempt information as per Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. In this case, the item would relate to paragraph 3, information relating to financial business affairs of a particular person. However, as most of you will have noted, the papers that we have in front of us, part 2 and part 1, are absolutely identical. I'm not sure the reason for that, but the only financial information that is available is in fact included in both parts. I'll come to you in a moment. So in my opinion, and having discussed it, we won't need to go to part 2, but let's see how it goes. The important thing is I'd like to remind members that the debate should focus solely on matters raised in the call-in and should not introduce any new points. So this is a call-in, it's not a scrutiny. And particularly, it's not a scrutiny of property or asset management. OSMC is simply asked to review the executive's decision based on the same information as the executive had on the night, and therefore to resolve to either confirm the executive decision, to continue, or propose amendments and refer it back. OSMC, my final thing is, it's not permitted to overturn the executive decision. Any queries on process before we proceed? Okay. Joseph, would you like to lead off with the introduction and the background, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. And obviously members have seen this report, hence the call-in, but this is for the disposal of the property here, which we refer to as York House. You can see some of the financial information in there as well. Just in section 5.3 of the report, that highlights the range of different service areas which have considered this property, which has been vacant at points over the last 5 years and has been subject to a range of interest from different internal stakeholders from within the council, but none of those have come to fruition. There may well be further interest, but all of that must be subject to a sort of business case. And given this has been vacant for so long, it was the executive's decision to proceed with the disposal for this property.
Is that it? Okay. Councillor Vickers, would you like to
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
give the reasons for the call-in, please? And
Yes. I mean, I'll go straight to reason number 7. But Councillor Brooks may wish to come back and run through the others, or indeed Councillor Abbs, Chairman. But as soon as I saw this report, and I know the property, and my wife, Martha, Councillor Martha Vickers, when she was working as a health visitor, regularly visited that property. So she knows it very well. And the first thing that occurs to me is, I wonder how many other members of the executive, including the executive member who fronted the decision, including us on OSMC. I've never been beyond the gate because I've known it wasn't a door to be knocked on for getting a vote because it was empty. So I do think for such an important decision, members both of this scrutiny committee and of the executive should have seen it. And you cannot, to my mind, consider as a member whether this is the correct decision unless you have seen the property, just as on a planning site visit, we always go and see the property. It's an important part. We have to take everything in the report as read and trust it. And I'm not saying I don't distrust officers any more than I distrust planning officers. But if we as members are being asked to make a decision, then we should be given the chance to see the property. Now, from what I'm told by Martha, it would be eminently suitable for one particular use, and I would like to know whether that has been considered, because the reason for call-in is all other possible uses. We want to know whether they have been fully considered. I'm not quite sure which department of the council would be appropriate for this, but maybe I can be advised by officers that are present now. 10 years ago, as a member of this council, I've had most memorable session of the looked after children, what we call a corporate parenting group, where we were given a presentation by a charity in Thatcham, which provides homes for young people leaving adoption and care of the council, for whom we are corporate parents. I know that charity has grown since. I know it has a very good reputation. I'm not going to give its name, but that describes the use, which I think this property would be eminently suitable for. And I know that at least one charity is looking for a similar property. Now, it may not be a direct use by this council, by an operational department, but I would like to know whether that was considered amongst all the other uses that were considered. And I think the report before us and the report before executive, when it came before them, doesn't give enough evidence of any of the uses that were considered that would help members make the decision they were being asked to. So I think executives should see more evidence. I would like to have seen more in our report, because I thought when we list the reasons for call-in, we would have the additional information that clearly our reasons for call-in indicate we feel are needed. But that is just one possible use, which I think, knowing the ward, knowing that some other possible uses, like, for example, an HMO, might not be so popular with the residents in the neighbourhood. I think, in such a site as that would be useful. I think I'll leave it at that for now, Chairman.
Okay. I think I had Councillor Brooks's hand up. Yes, I've got Councillor Abbs, but taking yours first.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't propose to suggest other ways it might be used. But what I find is wrong is the balance of reporting here. Now, I'm not a believer of reports just for the sake of it, bulky reports, duplications in the reports. But if the executive have considered this fully, there will be a lot more information they will have seen than is in this report. All of the options that they looked at are not in the report. We are simply expected to rely on their judgment that none of them were suitable. And that, for something like this, I think is too thin. I think members of the council and members of the public should have a much better understanding of how they came to the decision. I'd like to have seen a table with all the options, the pros and cons, and the judgment. But we don't get that. All we get is assurances that all options have been looked at. But if I take you to 5.4, members, I'm just scrolling down to it myself because it takes a lot longer on the screen than it would if it was paper. It says, in addition to the above, interest has been received from the education service for the purposes of education for young people with SEN and SEND, specifically young people of secondary age, etc. Final paragraph. This remains a potential option, but a business case and brief is yet to be drafted. And yet the decision has been made to continue with the disposal, the marketing around that, and the consideration of offers. So that in itself seems to me a reason to go back to executive and say, pause this until that business case and brief has been drafted and fully considered, and also to assure members through data and information rather than just verbal assurances that all options have been looked at. And then the other aspect in here is this the best time to get the value for money, the right time in the market to go to market with this? Would it be improved in terms of the offers if we were to invest in it, a bit like a house? You spruce it up a bit, you fix the windows before you put it on the market. How did it get to that stage? Is it been neglected? Too many questions, Chairman, for us to simply sit back and say this is a robust, suitable decision. So a few things there I'll quickly summarise. A lot of information missing to support the decision. Is the decision right? And is the estimated sale value of £700,000 improvable? And is this the right time to go to market? And has it been neglected such that the £700,000 is a lot less than it might have been had we kept it in a better state of repair? I hope that's clear, Chairman.
Chair, very clear. Thank you. I've got Councillor Abbs and then Councillor Masters. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try not to repeat too much, but I really wanted to talk a little bit to point 3 and point 5 on the call-in. Councillor Brooks has covered a little bit already, but just to re-emphasise some of it, about the optimum time to achieve the maximum capital receipt. It was mentioned during the debate at council that, questioned whether this was the optimal time. I think even since then, we've seen the evidence appear that this is actually not the optimum time. It's falling, and therefore, the chances of achieving a quick, high-value sale is diminishing. At the same time, as we have still awaiting the delivery of final plans and briefs, which is more than likely restrained by the fact that the officers are overworked and can't get through all the paperwork in time. So we're rushing at something, and we may end up doing what I fear most, and I'm sure the executive wouldn't want to do it either, which is potentially to get 700,000, but have actually missed out on getting 1.4 million. And where do I get those numbers from? It's quite simple, really. You look at number 52 next door, and it's Zoopla valuation, and it's up there in the 750,000 bracket. And we're talking about selling something twice the size, twice as substantial for less. So I didn't even need to look very hard to realise that we're not going to get a great deal here. I think with that, and then look at the various uses which I believe are out there, because I am not convinced that all other things have been looked at, and it is not for us to basically come up with a list of what they are, but it's information that should have been reported, to the executive, and that's my recommendation. We go back to the executive and say, just pause this, as we've just said, present us with the missing evidence, and then we can make a sound decision. And actually, in a few months' time, we'll really see how the recession is going to bite, and so on and so forth. We talk about the value that is delivered by the capital value. It's not that significant. I know 700,000 sounds a lot to a lot of people, but that's a guess as to what we're going to get. It's not a guarantee. The cost of where we are is 10,000. But where's the report on how much it would have cost to update so that we could have got the 1.5? There's so much information missing. But I just fear that the executive have made a choice, but without enough information. So that's why I was happy to sign, put my name to this call.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Can I just clarify just one thing on process? As you mentioned, it's you wanted this information so that we could make a proper decision. We don't make any decisions either. No, did I say that? I meant the executive make a decision. Yeah. I thought that's what I wanted clarified. Fine, thank you. Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chairman. Without trying to repeat, I support the call for the call-in, and on the grounds that in terms of the other options that have been considered, that many of them are heading for being 4 nearly 5 years previous, and the market's changed. The needs changed for the council. So I think the valuation of 700,000 probably relates to it as a plot for development ahead of any planning permission. They're probably, which raises the concerns as, the joint venture, which so far during the life of this council has done nothing, as far as I'm aware. It was deemed as too small for a viable redevelopment. I can see a time in the future where we sell it for £700,000, a developer levels it, and as Councillor Abbs has said, we get something that's worth considerably more. And it wouldn't have, so I think we should re-explore those considerations that are somewhat out of date, or at the very least, see what evidence was put forward to executive, echoing the other members here. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Masters. I'm going to go back to Joseph to respond to some of those, but if I could just summarize what I think were the main points I was hearing. There was question if the executive were, shall I use the term, rigorous enough in satisfying themselves that they had proper and sufficient data to make the decision. There was an actual question of, is this the best time to sell? There was a question of, is the estimated price quoted, is it reasonable? Where's that come from, and were the executive satisfied with that? There's also the question of, should we in fact have given a little bit more time to particularly sort out the children's services SEN project to look at before the executive took that decision. And finally, that was the original point, one of the first points. Did the executive or anybody in the executive, or did they satisfy themselves of the need or whether or not they needed to make a site visit? Those are the sorts of, Councillor Brooks, have I missed something?
Thank you for
in my
that.
summary?
I think so, sir.
Go ahead.
In as much as, was it well maintained after it was stopped being used? And the other thing I thought I made clear, maybe I didn't, I would have liked to have seen all the reports that supported that decision, which the executive may have had line of sight of, but we didn't.
I think I included that by the comment was, the question is was the executive rigorous enough in satisfying themselves if the likes of asset management and property management did a proper job of evaluating the alternatives? Come back. Okay.
Yes, Chairman, if I can come back, you made the point that we don't make a decision, which is fine, but surely if we're going to scrutinise a decision, we have to have all the information that we need to make a better recommendation, because it is only a recommendation to the executive, but we've got nothing more than we had when the executive met.
Well, that's, and that's the key point. I think that's the key point. We're not here to scrutinise. This is a call-in. It's not a scrutiny. We're not scrutinising asset management. We're not scrutinising property. We're looking at, so in my opinion, it's a valid question to say the executive did not have enough information to make the decision, which I think what you're saying, what I was trying to summarize. It's not for us to say they should have had A, B, C, and D.
Point of order, Chairman.
Who's making that?
Me. I am.
Councillor Coles.
I thought we were not looking at the subject of maintenance. Surely in maintenance, we're looking at a decision based on the current state of the maintenance, whatever it may be, not whether or not it had been properly maintained.
I think that's a valid point, and but the call-in people, the call-in members did mention maintenance, and your response is a valid one. But I'd now like to hear. I don't think that's a point of order. It's a valid debating point. I'd like now to hear from Joseph, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman and members, for all of your questions. So just first, I will take them in an order, but I try and answer all of them. Obviously, executive visit, I'm not an executive member, so I can't tell you if they have or have not visited the site. The question around the original one from Councillor Vickers around use of the charity coming in to use that. We are aware of that, but no business case has been put forward. We don't have an articulation of what that ask might be. And I think all of my answers that I respond here are couched around that this building has, except from sort of a period during COVID, has been empty now for a long period of time. You can see from the other reports, you've got an agenda around the revenue and the capital budget, as well as the report which was taken to executive earlier this month, that the council does face significant financial challenges at the moment, and you need to take those in the round when considering best value, etc. So we do not have a business case there for that. On the point around evidence of uses and executive understanding that, so two of the executive members are members of the asset management group, and so some of the proposals that have been put forward over the last 5 years, I'll just read some of them off now, but they're linked there. So the temporary accommodation was looked at over 4 years ago. The proposal was withdrawn from the service. There's also a proposal through housing to look at short-term rough sleeper accommodation. That proposal was withdrawn. There's then a proposal in late 18, early 19 through looking at move-on accommodation. Again, that ran into difficulties on trying to come up with a proposal. Housing did use this site during sort of 2019 through to quite recently for a sort of interim touch point for the homelessness service. There have been some proposals looking at this. Could it be a homelessness hub? Again, those proposals were withdrawn from the service. You mentioned the joint venture. That was withdrawn because of the size of the site, and actually there were proposals to tender. Tender was put out for registered providers to express an interest in this site over the last year, and no tenders or interest was received back then. Adult social care were also had a look at the site as well, but proposals were withdrawn because of the size of the site being too small. We're quite right on the education side. I'll answer that now. Again, there has been interest from the SEND team, and we have a significant pressure on the high needs block, and certainly some interest there, but no business case. So I don't know what that looks like. It's an interest, but we will be many, many months off having a business case which potentially could come through and could be enacted on. We have had some external interest through the CCG at the time. That was withdrawn as well, and there was reference as well in the paper on the school side of things. Again, that was withdrawn. So that hopefully gives you a little bit more flavour. Some of the detail behind that goes through the asset management group, but there have been a range of proposals put forward which have either been withdrawn or have just fallen by the wayside. And a lot of this is around the scale of the difficulty of the scale of the site. So if you're looking, for example, from an adult social care point of view, if you're looking for anything from extra care, for example, you would want a significantly larger site than that is being put forward through this. So I hope that answers some of the questions around that area. There's then, do you want me to?
No.
Then a question around what is the best time to go to market with this. Now, none of us have got a sort of crystal ball on when exactly that might be. But again, timing here is an important one. And again, I come back to this has been vacant and it's been around a range of services for a long period of time now. And it's important from a sort of best value taxpayer funds point of view that we do get the best value out of our assets, and we have considered this with a range of areas. And so now is the time to sell that. And one of the the reason I think that support that is around our capital financing requirement. So back when we set this year's budget, our borrowing costs were below 2%. Borrowing costs now, as at last week, were over 4%. So the value of this capital receipt to the council has gone up by about 50%. So if we were to borrow 700k, if we borrow at the start of this year, it cost us about £60,000, £700,000 now to borrow would cost us £90,000 a year. So the value in capital receipt and having a capital receipt so that we don't have to go out and borrow has substantially increased. So I take your point that in that could be counterintuitive to saying, look, the market, we don't know what's happening with the market, are things potentially going down for residential? But whatever that drop will be, it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that it's going to be more than 50%. So capital receipts now to us as a council have significantly increased compared to where we were at the start of this year, and indeed where we have been over a number of years with low levels of interest rates. So the impact on our borrowing is very significant from that side of things. To the maintenance point of view, Richard might need to come in on this one, but it has been used by the service up until relatively recently. So there has been somebody in there. Has it been maintained to exactly how it was being used in 2017? I suspect not. But you come in right at the end of that, right, Richard. I was trying to answer the other questions. And then the sort of point about, is it worth investing in the asset? Was a question in there. I think the difficulty there is I don't think we would want to distort what the market might want to do with the asset. So if we what would we enhance it as? Would we want to enhance it as the existing units at the moment and then somebody want to come in and convert those? Or would you want to demolish it and then somebody have a totally vacant site? So my real difficulty there from a sort of best value point of view is we could spend a significant amount of money and the market say, that's not really what we particularly want to do with this asset, and you've just wasted your money spending some money on there. And I think that the question about how much return we'll get here, that would be like the minimum price that we would set at auction. And I think the purpose of going out into the market is that you achieve best value through that, through asking the market what it is willing to pay and willing to do with that site. Because we've been through this for a number of times over the last 5 years. We've not been able to determine a sufficient business case to articulate what it is we want with this site, and hence why it's come through here as a proposal for sale to the executive.
Yes. Gentlemen, I've got a process here to run. I want the other members to make some comments or ask some questions, and then we come back to your good selves before we close off the debate. Members, that's basically Councillor Linden, Cole and Masters. Any points you would like to make? Any comments? Steve, Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that, Joseph. I'm still left with a feeling that a lot of the consultation with potential partners, with potential service providers within and without the council, it all seems very informal. So, for example, the option pursued in 2018 for the disposal of the site to West Berkshire Council and Sovereign for the joint venture, was that just informal discussions with officers, etc., or was there a report that's available that outlines why it's considered to be too small for development, etc.? Or, like I said, so that's where I'm a little bit uncomfortable. There's a lot of, we had a chat with somebody and they expressed an interest, but there was no business plan. How far was that and those individual options explored by the council and officers and yourself, for example, to explore whether there was anything, what officer time was put into working out whether it was viable, or was it just, that's not particularly attractive? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Linden.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Certainly what we heard from Joseph is quite important in terms of capital receipts. And obviously, if you wanted to do it up, would cost us money and we'd have to borrow it. So, the capital receipts are going to be tight. And we talked, I think, about over 4% and, you know, over a 30-year borrowing, and it's going to be tight for the capital budget. I don't know what's going to happen with the capital budget when we discuss it in March, but certainly in our costs from the local government board for borrowing is most probably going to go up again. So as interest rates are still likely to rise. So I think the challenges we have are quite acute. And obviously we've done quite a lot of work into alternative use as such. And maybe the reasons why the interest has not followed through. So I just want to raise those points, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cole, James.
Thank you, Chairman. To add to what Councillor Linden has said, if you look at selling a property and you think, right, well, let's chart it up a bit, put a coat of paint on, make it look better, that can work, particularly when a property is ready to live in. This one's not. I don't think anybody is suggesting that it is. So I cannot see the point in investing money in a property that, as Joseph is suggesting, that money is likely to be wasted. This question of when to sell, it's really hard to know when the right time to sell is. Are we talking 5 years' time? We might be. I think the council's reached a point where it hasn't yet identified the right use for it. It could do with the money rather than the property. It's possible, of course, that putting it up for sale will concentrate minds and bring in an offer, a usage that is maybe sitting there. But that apart, I'm actually reasonably comfortable with this going for sale. That's my view, Chairman.
Thank you. I do have Councillor Masters, you got your hand up again, or is that it's a new one? Just leave it then for a moment. Councillor Abs, I'd like to include you in the call-in group, please. So we go around. I'm still talking to other members, and I'm going to regard myself as another member. So I have a couple of questions. The first question, I wasn't that executive. This whole thing seems to hinge around, as the call-in members have said, that they felt that the executive didn't have enough, it wasn't in the papers, there wasn't a sufficient enough information to make a proper decision. I mean, that's the bottom line of this. Now, I know how this works because I've looked at section 6 of the papers, which they had. There's a whole list of summaries of things that were looked at and were dismissed, mainly dismissed because whoever was looking at them seems to have withdrawn their interest over the years. But I look at that and say, okay, so that's a summary, and that's come from the property management and the asset management group. So the real question is, how much trust, and I think you used the term, Councillor Vickers, how much trust did the executive have in the reports from asset management and property? How much do you trust the officers? Now, looking at the papers here, there's a summary, but I wonder, my question is, not having been an executive, did executive members ask many questions of the asset management team or the property management at the executive? Well, let me ask Joseph.
I need to try and remember. I can't remember how many questions. I think there's some opposition questions. I think Councillor Vickers was probably there. I can't remember off the top of my head how many questions were asked, Chair.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Tony, you.
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, it's one of the unfortunate side effects of the executive system is that, and we all know this, there are discussions before the meeting. Nobody apart from the executive has a vote. So probably the executive members don't need to ask any questions because it's all been dealt with as more or less a presentation by them. And it's only the opposition that get to ask the questions.
Yep.
And I have to say there wasn't much of a presentation from the executive member. He was very businesslike, as he always is. And we sort of, well, you know, we've just got to accept it then, haven't we? Well, no, we don't. We have a call in.
Yeah.
That's why we have a call in.
Okay.
But we're having no more evidence, no more ability to scrutinize than we had or anybody had at executive. That is a problem. I mean, I would like, if I may, while I'm sort of got the floor, Chairman, just to ask a question that came out of Joseph's earlier presentation speech. You've heard best value. Now, am I right in thinking that best value doesn't have to be best price at auction if we are working with, should we say, our partners, because so much of our services are now outsourced. And one of the benefits of having partners who are of charitable status is that they can leverage in funding that we would not otherwise leverage in. And they're doing good jobs for us as the corporate parent. This is why very soon after the meeting, when I thought, well, are there any other things that haven't been looked at? And I knew about this charity. I've approached them since to see, yeah, are you still looking for a property? I didn't ask them, had you actually considered this and put in a business case? Perhaps I should have done, but I know they are actively seeking a property.
You're right.
So, I mean, my question to Joseph is, you know, when you're talking about best value, would he, as the finance director, be happy that it wasn't the best price, but it was best value in the broader sense for the community and looking at the council's strategy?
And can I just thank you for that? And I'd like Joseph to answer it, but I had a second question, which is not too far away from yours, was basically, and I was thinking of the children's services, the SEN that had still to be worked through. If we were to say tonight, go ahead, implement the decision to sell, are we therefore precluding some other work from a charity or from children's services coming in? And how long do they have? That to me is a vital question. Joseph, please. I've Councillor Abbs and Councillor Masters, I've still got you holding here.
Okay, I'll answer these three questions. And actually, I think they are all interlinked, both Councillors Masters, Vickers, and yours, Chairman. Because I think once this goes to the market, that opportunity, Councillor Masters, for other people then, other partners who we may well not approach and don't even potentially know are out there, they have the opportunity then to come in and you know, bid for this and engage with us, because there'll be people who may well not even know what this site is, where it is, and that we're interested in selling it. So that decision puts this to the market and puts those interest out there. And to Councillor Vickers and your point, Chairman, around best value, no, best value can be wider than that. And if you look, for example, to our social value policy that we have through our procurement and legal colleagues, we open that up as part of our procurement processes now to include social value there as part of that best value judgment. So no, we're not precluding this. So if somebody was within the council was to say, right, I've got this great business case, it's going to save, you know, millions of pounds in SEND or in supporting XYZ part of our council strategy outcome, that could be considered as part of this. But I do go back to, this has been vacant, or pretty much vacant for the last 5 years, and we have not seen that business case come through. It is no secret within the council that this building is empty, and Richard has been very open with trying to get responses from services. We sort of nearly get to this position of taking something to executive, and somebody might come along and say, oh no, I think I've got an idea, and then that sort of comes in and says, oh no, actually I'm afraid no, I've sort of looked at it and it's the site's not quite right for that. There has to be a point, I believe, that we say enough's enough from an internal point of view, and we get this out into the wider market.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abbs.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. One point I wanted to make is that we keep talking about being a long time, it's 5 years, right? It really isn't that long. 2 of those years we were in special circumstance. So we're really talking about 3 years where we could consider doing something. The cost of the maintenance, as I understand it, I don't think this is confidential information, is down at £10,000 per annum. So we're not talking a massive amount of money. Now, the question I have always is, as Councillor Cole pointed out, maintenance. Well, in 2017, it was still being used, and therefore it was a habitable state, one assumes. I wasn't in there in 2017, but one assumes if it was being used, it was habitable. So why did we, set a maintenance program so low that it's not habitable anymore? Because one of the reasons it's being put up because it's so expensive to now go and maintain it or catch up on all the maintenance. And that worries me because, one of the reasons we've said before. But I mean, the other thing is the sentence that keeps coming back that we've investigated all possible uses. Well, I don't know about you, Chairman, but I can think of plenty of different ways of going to the market and saying, actually, we can't think of anything internally. Would you like to kind of give us some ideas, partner with us? We've got these assets around West Berkshire. So that statement in itself is kind of, we thought of everything. No way can a council think of everything. So but that's why we have partners. That's why we have the market. But we don't have to take what I find is the oddest move here, because Joseph has just mentioned that, we'll still have a chance to consider this, that and the other. No, we won't. We won't, because we've chosen the auction route. And the auction route is basically a fast and quick way of getting something sold. So I interpret the primary reason for choosing the auction route is to get the capital receipt as quickly as possible. Now, that might be an objective in itself, but then it needs to be set out as the primary objective. And the executive need to have been aware of, or it should have been in the report, that the primary reason for the disposal of this asset is the immediate need for the capital asset to be released. So I'm trying to keep an open mind on all this, but I'm still end up stuck in the situation where I just don't think the executive had enough information, and therefore the decision that they've made, it could be amended if they had better information. They may not amend it, but they might.
Before I go to Councillor Masters and then back to Councillor Brooks, I just several times have been mentioned about the maintenance. Whether that's the right maintenance, the right level, whether we got there or not is irrelevant to this. The fact is, this decision from the executive, that we considered, was as the York House is today. How it got there, whether it was the right way to go, irrelevant to this discussion. I'd like just to make that point. I'd like to clarify, however, with something that Councillor Abs has raised. I thought I read in the report, and I may be wrong, that the auction was one option. He was implying that was the only option. Joseph, would you clarify that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, you're quite right. I think in the paper, we're looking at the route, the method of disposal. So after executive, would it be better to do as an auction or market it separately? So that decision itself hasn't been made and has
not been made. Okay, fine. Thank you for that.
My apologies, Chairman. I thought that had been.
Thank you, Chairman. And I keep coming back to there's lots of mention about getting best value, and whether that's a upfront price of 700 grand or it's offset against services that we can save, ongoing revenue costs, etc. I'm aware at the moment that pretty much every temporary accommodation that the council owns is full because of people who are unable to, essentially homeless. And we're also putting up an extremely large number of families and individuals in hotels. And then one figure that I was quoted only last week was that we're spending about £2,000 a night on hotels. Now, if it was, if one department can speak to another, within the council, I'm pretty sure we could save more than the £10,000 a year that it's costing to maintain and maintain it. And I know the maintenance is not the issue here, but we still have a capital value of a property. Where it's like we're trying to sell the family silver, which this, if I'm being honest, this administration has done several times over the last 5-10 years already. with no real net benefit to the council. I think we're getting rid of an asset that could be used to offset some ongoing costs in a housing crisis right now. So that's my concern.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Thank you for waiting.
I come back to the fact that the original decision, as it was made in public at executive, did not show the supporting information to get that decision. Mr. Holmes this evening has started to refer to some of that went through the asset management group. And I put it to you that, frankly, we could have had that, all that information that went to asset management group to this commission, even in a part 2 basis, to show us that the decision was based on a rigorous process and rigorous, robust information, fulsome information that said we've looked at all these options, and you can see we've looked at all these options and they just don't pass muster. Now, Mr. Holmes also said, well, we never got anything back on the SEN and it will take many, many months, he told us, to even consider getting that in. Now, I put it to him that we are a small unitary authority. We're not Birmingham City Council. And why would it take many, many months to go to the head of education and say, I want a business case on this within 3 months, or else it's not even in scope for you? Now, where was the decision-making path that said, departments, you have until this date to put up an outline business case for this property, otherwise we'll do something else? Where was that decision path? We haven't seen it, and in the void of it, we cannot see this decision as being sound. You've mentioned a few times that it's not a question of maintenance. I think in another place it probably is. Are we maintaining our assets in good, saleable value? So if you don't want to take it tonight, I suggest we look at it elsewhere.
I would agree with you. It's
okay.
If we're going to look at it, is
right.
another time and place.
Fair enough. So let's leave that down as a marker, if we may. If we go to market, then every organisation out there will say, well, they're intent on selling this, they're intent on selling it quickly. I don't have time to get my act together and I didn't want to buy it, but I might have wanted to lease it and pay them a nice sum of money for leasing it for the next 5, 10, 20 years, which is what the Thatcham Town Council have done with the Priory building. I just don't feel that we have had a proper supporting evidence to consider this decision sound. And I therefore would like to refer it back to executive, sir, in order for them to come back and say, this is why we consider it to be sound. And on my recall is very good of the evening. There were no questions within executive about the robust process. And I just think the process here has been something we cannot rely on. Now, Chairman, I'll finish by saying you know, members of the executive, members of the ruling group might consider this all to be politics. And yes, we know the motivation for these things, but by all that is reasonable, this has not been proven to this council. It might have been proven to the executive, but they've not convinced this council they've got it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Brooks. You've actually summarised.
Yeah, I was going to, you've done partly what I was going to do as the lead member who recorded in, Chairman. But I mean, do you want me to just do that?
Well, I think he summarised it.
I think he has, yeah.
Yeah, I think, because he's more or less got my words down here as well. And before I go to the vote, I'd just like to give my observations, like everyone else has done. I mean, this comes down to, did the executive feel enough data, enough information to make a considered opinion? And in fact, what we've got to do tonight is to decide, do we feel as a group that it had enough information to make a considered opinion? I have a concern, a little bit of a concern, because Councillor Vickers raised the issue that this is how the executive works, and maybe not a satisfactory way of working. I've been on the executive, as of most people. This is how the executive works. We take reports from our various officers, from the officers who support the relevant portfolio holder. We don't at the executive actually do the rigorous interrogation, but hopefully that rigorous interrogation took place in places like, and I've been on it as well, the Asset Management Board. I've had property report to me in property. So what I'm a little bit concerned about here with this is it's not just a call in on this issue. We're actually challenging how the executive actually works. And that worries me because whilst I may be able to support an individual situation, I find it difficult to support something that challenges the whole basis of how the executive works. That's just my view. Other people will have different views. Tony, please.
No, Chairman, I take your point. That's the way executive works. But you then said that it comes to a body such as this, and indeed it does come to a body such as this. And I felt that it was implicit, if not explicit, in our call-in letter that by saying there wasn't enough evidence, it wasn't in the public domain, that we would get the evidence because our role is to do the scrutiny. Now,
No,
we're here with
I keep coming back to this because this is vital, and I have spent some considerable time with the monitoring officer to make sure we're correct. We are not here. This is a call-in. It is not scrutiny.
No, but we make recommendations. I've
We
been
make
on scrutiny for
recommendations.
years, Chairman. I chaired the resource management working group,
Yeah.
subgroup, and we got a lot more information in scrutiny about particular properties than we have here. I feel we should recommend to the executive, and we are in the business of recommending,
Yeah.
that they review this decision in the light of a more complete evidence base, which would be in the public domain and enable the right questions to be asked there and then, and a decision made based upon the information that's in the public domain, if necessary in part two. And I just, in a sense, what we've done this evening has been pointless because we've had no more information to scrutinize with than executive action.
I concur. But I just remind you that part two is not public domain.
Well, okay.
Well,
If necessary.
you have confused that twice in your last two sentences. One more, and then I'm going to go to vote.
Very good. I heard what you said, Chairman, about the executive system. And would this, in a way, cause a ripple or more through the way we do things through the executive system? Well, you know, sir, perhaps we should. Perhaps we should expect more information on all the executive reports to show the council that they have thoroughly gone through the item, the issue, rather than relying on the trust that we have, and we do have trust in our officers, but relying on it. We're here as forensic analysts. So your point about worrying about, am I now being drawn, Chairman, being drawn into the executive system and whether it works or not, I think it could be better. And this is a good example by giving much more information. And if you stop giving that information gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's the danger.
Okay.
And I hope you will take that into account as you bring this to a conclusion.
Thank you. I've just got, Joseph, you wanted to come back and say something, and this really is the last.
It's just in response to one of the questions raised was around making sure from Councillor Brooks that there's a deadline for getting a business case in. I think Richard better say, but I've lost count of the number of times that Richard has asked services, if you don't get something in by this point, that's it. It's going to come through. And at the sort of 11th hour, each time somebody kind of thinks, oh, maybe I'll do this. And then we keep going as we are to have 5 years of a property which is vacant, which could be utilised for something which was more effective.
Fine, thank you. I am now going to go to a vote on this topic, and I'm going to the proposal appears to be as written in your call-in. Refer the matter back to executive for further consideration. That's the summary. I take it. Who's proposing that? Second. Proposed and second. Thank you. So I'm now actually going to ask members, please, to vote on. We have a proposal to refer the matter back to executive for further consideration. All those in favor of that motion, please show. That's 3. Can I just, I'm going to rescind this a little bit, because if you remember at the beginning of the meeting, Councillor Abbs asked, would I do an indicative? So he is attending, but on Zoom. I'm going to ask him which way he would vote on this before I do. Councillor Abbs, I'm assuming you would be supportive of that proposal.
Yeah, even after quite an interesting debate, I would still be in support, yeah.
Fine, thank you for that. Now, those against the proposal, please show. Sorry, gentlemen, it's 3-3. And I am going to put my casting vote to dismiss the call-in, simply because of the comments I made, which only became apparent to me during this debate, that this is about more than just an individual decision. It's about a possible questioning and challenging of how the executive system works. And frankly, that is well beyond my pay grade. So a good debate, nevertheless, with many valid points made. And I'm sure members of the executive, when they see this, the report we will send, will take note. Thank you.
Chairman, is there any way of noting the fact that physical disability has meant that a vote has gone the wrong way, effectively? So if I had been able to get into the chamber tonight, if there hadn't been for a physical disability, then this would have been a 4-3 situation.
Well, I also have a couple of members from the other side of who are also ill and incapacitated. So that's speculation, frankly, as to how a vote would have gone. But we note
not at all, Chairman. You just ran an indicative vote, and
it's an indicative vote. You're exactly right. But an indicative vote.
And previous meetings, when an indicative vote had been given, as party we agreed,
as the
we wouldn't go against the indicative vote.
As the monitoring officer said, the indicative vote's an indicative. It doesn't carry any weight.
So cross-party agreements then.
Your point, by the way, about people being incapacitated and possibly should be able to vote is one which I think would find sympathy, but I really don't know how to go about that. I think that's national policy more than anything.
Yeah, so we are operating under a legal framework. The LGA, certainly post-COVID, made great efforts to enable meetings to take place remotely or in a hybrid format. And in terms of the council chambers accessibility, the council building is accessible to people with disabilities. So I would refute the suggestion that members can't attend the chamber due to physical disabilities. So I think the chamber.
I don't want to go into the whole, but yeah, I don't have a wheelchair at home that I can just whip out and get to the office. Thanks.
Fine. Okay, I think it's a debate for offline and for another time. I'd like to move on, please, to item 7, an interim report on the customer journey task group. Councillor James Cole, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll have a little bit more agreement on this one. It's been an interesting and essentially cross-party journey so far. The out-of-hours piece was an identifiable chunk on its own. I didn't actually know there was an out-of-hours option for getting out of the car park. Could have done with knowing that before. The phone number element is certainly being picked up. Particular bits 526, the number of emergency duty officers across the council. This does need to be addressed. 527, the mystery shopping. We await news on what's to be offered there. I do draw your attention to 535. Figures show the council's contact centre performed well on first contact resolution, but less so call answering and the call abandon rate. And 537, the reference to the original standard of 15 seconds, moving to 30 seconds and then 90 seconds. So there is room for improvement. But of this part, mystery shopping apart, reality suggests we won't spend much more time on this between now and March next year. The rest is all part of a whole. A lot of discussion around the website. Councillor Abbs has made some suggestions that are now being looked at. Some of the public certainly do think we need to make some improvements to their journey. Environment and development and planning are at the top of the list. Communications are a highlight. Council's e-bulletins are not yet as well known as they could be. We did get some interesting answers from the members' survey, but we only had 9 respondents. I thought that was very disappointing. But what came up, poor website search, number of comments on report a problem, apparently no use of the chatbot yet, various other things like telling members what's happening in their ward. The report a problem function is improving. I had cause to test it myself on Friday and yesterday, and I put in some additional observations to John Winstanley. For example, to get to find the status of a reported problem, you seem to have to go via the map used to report a new one. If I missed a faster route, so may others. A lot of time's been invested in this. Very late on, we were told about the Customer First Programme Board. This by Councillor Hilary Cole, not by an officer. That is no criticism of Gordon. Not his fault that he didn't know about it. Just seemed rather odd that nobody said it existed, and yet it's been trying to do much of what we've been looking into. Personal thinking, not yet discussed with my task group colleagues, would be that whoever gets to scrutinise the council after next May, this process should continue. Public expects the council to improve its way of dealing with the public. If councillor scrutiny of that can help, then the process should continue, perhaps broken down into smaller chunks in future, but continue nevertheless. I certainly intend that we will discuss this before this task group finishes in March. Thank you, Chairman.
Could you just remind members who was on the task group, please?
We have ended up with Councillor Abbs. We have Councillor B. Oloko, and who was our third member? Caroline Culver.
Caroline Culver, thank you. Okay. Any questions? Councillor Vickers.
Chairman, yes, thank you. Huge piece of work, almost about the biggest task group terms of reference in terms of scope that I've ever seen. I think probably too big because things are changing as you look at them. I mean, as you referred to, the reporter problem system is changing, the phone system's changing. I mean, that's good. I wouldn't want to hold up the changes. And I'm sure you're learning a lot that's really interesting and valuable and valued by the officers. So great. Just a few comments. I would advise against, and I wonder if you would agree, if you want me to put it as a question, agree that perhaps you don't go down the rabbit hole of looking at the quality of service provided more generally, other than just the quality of the interface between the customer, the resident, and the service, as opposed to the service in general. Because I mean, you went on to talk about the residents, what you call the annual customer survey. I've bookmarked that page, and I thought, oh my God, is he going to go into every service and see what the public think of that service and why? So please don't go down there. I think that basically the out of our service, the contact center, and the interface with the website is plenty, and it's a really good work. And I just say, you know, hope you can manage to finish it by March before the systems that you're looking at change.
Oh, the systems that we're looking at are constantly changing. But that's fine. That's great.
And some of those changes are from your recommendations, I think.
Yeah, that's
Which is
good.
good.
That's good that you don't have to wait until the final report.
I think,
yeah, of course
I
we'll do
think
that.
the point you made, Councillor Vickers, of we're going to be looking at the interface rather than the quality of what you actually get at the back is it's a different question, isn't it? Just before, I've got a few hands up. Just before we go, I want to address the size of this, because one of the reasons it was such comprehensive was, if you recall, there was we combined two. There was a request that we actually look at out of hours. Mainly the catalyst for that was bad experience one or two members had, and then obviously the sight and fetching with the travellers, and it rapidly became. We thought at the time, well, maybe we should combine the two. In retrospect, perhaps that wasn't such a good decision. It made it a lot bigger than we should have. I've got a couple of other questions, but I'll let other people first. Councillor Abs.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, York House, funnily enough, was one of the things the customer used the journey, because that's the same place that had the fire alarm going off all weekend. And just to show you how bad things are, which I still don't understand. I've been told the report exists now, but it's still not made it to the ward remembers. And this is months that's gone by. So yeah, we're interested in the travellers thing. I thought Councillor Cole confirmed. I thought that was the one in Emborne that was also there. But by the by, I just wanted to say, as someone who joined the task group halfway, really to say what a pleasure it's been to be a member of that task group, because it is done in a very collaborative way. Maybe some credit to James there, but and I'm really pleased that we're taking the opportunities to put interim reports in and suggestions as we go along. With, I can absolutely tell you, the web industry is and software in general is my game these days. It changes every few months. It's not years. So yeah, we have to stay on top of it all the time. But I haven't really got any questions myself per se, because obviously I'm a member of that group. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abs. Councillor Linden.
Thanks, Chairman. Somebody who's quite ancient on being a councillor, and Councillor Brooks is getting close to it, but it's the amount of change in terms of the customer journey. When I started in 1983, you know, we weren't using emails, we didn't have computers, unless you worked for a company or you had a fairly basic low memory systems of, that's before I was using computers. You know, we were using letters, and, you know, constituents complained that letters weren't being answered. We still have the problems with emails. And I think this is quite a comprehensive report. There's still work to be done on it. But, you know, customers think differently. People's brains think differently. There's an American term for it. You know, some people do things in geometry, some on mathematical views, some are on pictures, and people's minds work differently. And, you know, in IT, people think generally in certain ways, or if you're in the civil service in terms of tests and whatever. And we need to be responsive to our customers for things that actually work and make things easy for the customers to use the system, realizing that people's brains are wired in different ways. And that's really the point I want to raise. And I know other councillors have got a viewpoint on that. Thank you, Jim.
Certainly agree. People are wired differently. Councillor Brooks.
Nice piece of work, this. I've just been reading it. And I love the fact we're doing it. It's throwing up a lot of issues, a lot of things to be fixed. They won't be all fixed overnight, but by golly, they need fixing. I was particularly keen to give you an experience I had of the council. They introduced a new website for the business community, and it's a rather nice website. It had no link to our main website, and our website had no link to the business site. Simple things like that. And when I challenged, when I asked the economic development team, they said, well, that's communication. And when I asked communication, they said, that's economic development. We're a small authority. We need to talk to each other and get our website talking to each other as well. And I hope that, you know, this is a part work in progress. Let's keep doing it, because there's more to be flushed out.
It's interesting. I had a question relating to that for James, but before I do that, I'm going to just make the other point. It's under the lessons learned bit. Some of the reasons for it taking so long is a lack of officer support and resource. There's this task group and there's another task group and another one. It's very, very difficult. You need to know that I'm continually the squeaky wheel with both the leader and the chief executive. Anybody else who cares to listen, that we need more resource in OSMC from an officer point of view. And I think we do a great job with what we've got, what we could do with more. My question was to do with this kind of this silo and who knows what. You also make the point that knowledge of if you'd known that there was a customer first programming board and a place review, it might have helped avoid some duplication. Any reason why it wasn't known? I was aware of a place review. I wasn't aware of the customer first program board. Maybe I should have been, but any reasons why that?
Chairman, you've been around.
They're all done in secret by any chance? I mean, I have no idea.
Chairman, you have been around so long that it seems reasonable that you might have been more likely to know.
Yeah.
New people like me, certainly not. But we were a bit surprised it came up so late.
Okay. But it's an interest. It's the point that Councillor Brooks is making. We're still working in these little silos in our own groups, and communications across is, and that's maybe something you might highlight later on in your final report. Okay.
May I say one more thing?
Yes, and I've got Councillor Abs, and then we move to the next item. Okay.
Which is to thank Gordon for all he has put in, all he has put up with, and will no doubt continue to do up to March.
Yeah, well, we'll echo that. Councillor Abs?
Yeah, yes, Chairman, all I was going to say, the difference I saw when it became, because I didn't know about it either, was strategic versus operational. And the OSMC review seems to be more strategic focused, and the other seems to be more operational focused. But that, again, came to our attention very late in the game. So,
well, I'm a little bit cynical as well. I've noticed that maybe the fact that there is a OSMC task group asking these questions has actually caused a few people to look at things like the phone system that I've been complaining about for about 6-7 years. Anyway, there we go. Thank you very much for that, James. We'll look forward to your final report in March. I'd like to move on now to the next task group report on fees and charges. Tony.
Thanks, Chairman. Again, I'd like to start with praising Gordon Oliver.
Yeah. We're touched for time. Can we?
Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to add that. The interim report summary I'm going to give you, it's not going to be pages and pages. The original intention was for the task group to submit its final report to OMC in September in time for recommendations to be incorporated into next year's budget. Unfortunately, we were delayed in starting the review due to the customer journey task and finish group overrunning. Also, we had issues with both officer and member availability over the summer period, so we only managed to meet twice before the end of October. Members wanted to bring an interim report to this meeting to set out some preliminary proposals so they could be incorporated in the March 2023 budget reports. These proposals mostly relate to the content presentation of information in the budget reports, and we expect to make more detailed recommendations in the final report, which we hope to present to the OSMC in March. Our initial recommendations are set out in section 6 of the report. These suggest that in future fees and charges report include the following. Details of income received for each fee stroke charge, and if possible, the number of units sold. This would allow members to understand the significance of each one to the council. B, a consistent key throughout the document that shows whether there is a statutory requirement to levy a fee stroke charge, and if we have any say in setting the amount. C, supporting narrative to explain the rationale behind any proposed changes to fees stroke charges. D, the percentage increase stroke decrease for each fee charge stroke charge. And E, clear reasons for choosing a particular measure of inflation. F, information on when benchmarking was last carried out by each council department. Members felt that this should be carried out on a regular basis. G, an estimation as to likely impact of the changes in fees and charges on the level of future income. I'd also like to add that obviously this task group is a scrutiny one, and there may be certain officers who need to recognise it, because I know there was some feedback on that at corporate board. But obviously my members of the board with me on this task group have been very, very helpful, and I've always had an inclusive report, and I suspect, Chairman, that Councillor Brooks and Councillor Masters may wish to add things as well as Mr. Oliver.
Thanks, Tony. A bit of a theme coming tonight, isn't it? Get more data, get more information, more detail. Councillor Brooks.
Exactly that. And without risking repeating what Councillor Linden said, I've always been puzzled, I don't know about you, when I see all these tables of fees and charges, what was the rationale and why this was up by this was down by that, how many units were sold? I'd like to do a commercial analysis on it. I'm sure you would have, with your background, to say, well, is this a suitable thing to do? We're doubling the price of that, but we only sold one of them last year. You know, I hope that will be the big upside of this fees and charges task group, that members will see how the workings came about, because they'll have the data, the information so to do. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to make just a comment about the timing. Obviously, it's coming back to this commission in March, which will be post the council having set the budget for the year ahead. So there's potentially another year's wait until the impact of some of the conclusions it will make, just to raise that point.
Okay. Well, it would be helpful in the budget to have some of that little bit more detail and explanation, if that's at all possible.
Yeah, Chairman, with respect, I think some of this could be in this year's budget round. If they've got the data, they just put it in the report, please.
Joseph.
I'm not saying that won't happen, but obviously you're still doing work, is my point. So your overall conclusions.
And the real question is if they've got the data. That's the issue. Okay, fine. I'd like then to move on to the next item on the agenda, item 9, which is the appraisal review. This comes from a previous OSMC whereby we went into all the detail about the new cultural framework for and kind of glanced over some of the questions we had about appraisal. So Paula Goodwin has put the whole thing together and focused on appraisals on a short report on page 145. Paula, would you like to just give us a summary of that and be prepared to take questions?
Yes, okay, thank you. So as you've said, this is the second paper that's come to OSMC in relation to appraisals. Hopefully this paper covers off some of the points that people wanted to hear raised. The report covers the process, or the current process that we have in place, and appendices to the back of the report is the current policy and the current form that is utilised for the appraisal process. Within the report, you've also got appraisal data at table 1. That relates to the current percentage of appraisals undertaken since March 2021. Unfortunately, there is some data that is missing because we've had restructures in some areas, and therefore there is data from March 2021 that isn't available because those services are new at that time. I just wanted to cover off the fact that we do appraisal training. So all staff are required to undertake appraisal training. It is mandatory as part of people's induction, as well as kind of ongoing. People are expected to undertake that on a regular basis, and they are now reminded of when that is required. We don't currently have an electronic system that is able to maintain information in relation to appraisal data. So the appraisal forms that you see at the back of the document are maintained by the service area and by the manager. We don't have a central depository, if you like, to be able to put all of that information, but that is something we are looking at this moment in time. We have just gone out to procurement for a HR payroll system, and within the specification, there is an ask for a performance management and appraisal part of that system. In terms of personal development, so of course, as part of that appraisal process, we have a PDP section and personal development. that is considered locally by managers in relation to budget. So managers hold some level of budget for personal training. HR hold a corporate training budget, and we undertake training needs analysis annually now so that we can ensure that the requirements of the organisation are met, and that where we can corporately, we can supply training that supports the organisation and individual employees where possible. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take questions on the report.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Unless I've misread this, the table 1, if it's a red, amber, green, there's an awful lot of reds on there, and yet the conclusion is the appraisal system is working well. I'd like some more information on that. That statement is working well against a table that doesn't suggest it is. But my broader point is we talk a lot about objectives. We talk about SMART, which are absolutely right. I like it. But you know, the best appraisals are about the softer stuff, the emotional stuff, how the employee is feeling, how they can feel better in their well-being, their motivation, their mindset, not simply sitting down and saying, right, let's have a look at your objections, now you got on against them. And I really would like a little bit more assurance, a lot more assurance, frankly, that we're not using these appraisals as the twice a year we get in touch with people, sit them down and say, we've got to look at your objectives. Because you might remember, I mean, you were IBM, I was ICL, we would be able to walk in and talk to our governor at any time and say something is on my mind and get some advice, get some guidance, get some support, and off you go. And that could happen ad hoc whenever you needed it. And I hope that's happening here because it's so vital. I hope, I'm going to be assured it is, but I don't see anything in the report that suggests that. It really looks like it's objectives led, and you want that, but you need more. And finally, the one I was bad at, having done hundreds of appraisals over the years, very good at the talk, and I was bad at writing them up. And I wonder how we're doing on that, because holding the appraisal is one thing and documenting it is another. I probably should have done it in flight. I left it till afterwards and then it became a burden. So a few things there I'd like some assurance on, please.
Okay, well, I'll ask Paula to come back to you on that. Just before she does, I'll say I know from talking to her, she's onto the softer things. And the previous report had more of that than hard objectives, which is why we asked for the report to be focusing a little bit more on personal objectives.
If I may come back, Chairman, sorry. A manager should look to the well-being of his staff. He's a leader, he or she is a leader. And I see organisations nowadays say, well, for all that sort of stuff, you better go after HR.
Yeah.
I hope we don't have that culture here, please.
Well, Paula, address that.
Okay, so hopefully I'll take the questions in the way they've been, in the order they've been sent. So in terms of the table and the red, amber, green, they're red, amber, green to show where the numbers have gone down rather than as in comparison to KPIs. We don't necessarily have a KPI in relation to this particular topic. So we do have kind of 90% in terms of red, amber, green. So we ensure that people are hitting the green, which is the 90%, but the table actually has been put together on the basis of, it probably is unhelpful because where it's red is showing where there's been a dip rather than where it's not meeting that KPI. So that's just the way the data has been pulled together. In terms of well-being, so we also hold one-to-one. So we encourage our managers, and it is noted in the report that our managers are required to have regular one-to-ones with our employees. And that should be as a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks. And within the one-to-one form, there is a section around well-being. So we are asking our staff when we are recording that information, or asking our managers to record that information. So there is regular conversations in relation to well-being. We have a well-being officer that commenced employment on the 1st of March this year and has made great waves, if you like, and has moved forward the wellbeing agenda for the organisation. So I'm not going to go into lots of detail in terms of her objectives and what she has delivered, but we are making sure that we are supporting our employees and our managers from a wellbeing perspective, because we have a wellbeing officer within the organisation. In terms of the form itself, as I think Councillor Law has alluded to, that the framework at the back of the current form and Appendix 1 talks about standards for competencies. At the previous meeting, we discussed the fact that a new behaviour framework had been agreed. It has yet to be implemented, and we are going to implement that in the new year. And this will replace this current competency framework that you have at the back of the form. And within that behaviour framework, it has more of the soft skills and how we expect our employees to behave. And of course, that will be embedded not just in appraisals, but in other policies and procedures across the organisation. And then finally, in terms of documenting this, the expectation is that managers and employees will make sure that this is documented quickly. And as far as I'm aware, like we don't record, like I say, we don't have a central repository for having that information. But as far as we're aware, that is happening. And managers are asked to record when they have appraisal meetings within our HR payroll system. So we have information around dates where this is happening. And of course, we are making sure that we are encouraging. There's lots of communication about making sure this happens and when appraisals happen as well. And support is available for managers in terms of future training, if that's what they want to do as well. Hopefully that answers all those questions.
Thank you. Well, I've got Councillor Linden, Councillor Vickers, Councillor Cole. Let me go. Tony Linden, Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I would totally concur with what Councillor Brooks has said. I mean, we've really got to look after our staff, our council officers. We've got to listen. We've got to make sure it's decent morale, and we also need feedback, you know, from managers as well, how they're working with our staff. You know, unless we can get some pretty bad management, and Elon Musk is certainly not the worst. But I think you get my drift here. And obviously it's complicated matters that we obviously have the political leadership of this council as well needs to affect in terms of how our council officers feel, work in a rather difficult environment, which is not only cost of living, but other personal issues as well, and to obviously avoid things like bullying and whatever. But when I go back to table 1, as somebody who's on audit and governance on the Royal Berkshire Fire Authority, obviously this comes up in terms of appraisals, and sometimes it's been weak, and we've had some problems in the past, mainly over COVID. And when I see a green in Director of Services, Support and People, and it's gone down between March 2022 at the end of COVID to September 22 as a major effect to 33%. It is totally and utterly unacceptable. And we have also got declines elsewhere. It is a significant problem. The education services has went down, it went up again, and now is slowly going down again. And there's problems in the Police Directorate between March 2022 to September, it's 50%. So, you know, I look at that and the problems that we've faced. And I know some of our officers and managers are very stressed because obviously we're not overstaffed in this authority. But, you know, it is important because we're here to provide a service, both councillors and officers, to our 161,000 plus residents, and especially those who are vulnerable adults and children. And it's vitally important that the whole cog works, that we don't hemorrhage in staff. And we do have an issue which we're going to discuss later in terms of having people who we have to pay, contractors, for more expensive services rather than having our homegrown staff or having staff coming in from elsewhere, from other countries to meet our staff shortages. It is vital that we are there to serve our public. Forget politics and personal ambition. Our job is to serve the public, whether you're a councillor or an officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I think there was, I'm not sure what the questions were in the middle of that, but your comments were valid. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I've never been on personnel. My interest in this subject was raised when at the briefing a few months ago on the situation of the Police Directorate, there was a comment that several officers in planning had not had an appraisal for several years. Now, the appraising officers in these cases may have gone by now. I know there's been a considerable turnover of managers there, but it made me think, well, what is going on? And is COVID and working from home having an impact on the frequency and quality of the appraisal system? When I was in the army, a large part of my job as a squadron commander was writing annual reports for the 100+ soldiers that worked for me. And it was a two-way process. You know, the army is a hierarchical field of work. Councils are fairly hierarchical. But, you know, you're not on the playground in the appraisal interview. It should be a two-way process where the person being appraised feels free to say what they need. And it may not be in terms of numerical targets. I see there's a section D in the form which deals with, you know, career development. But when we look at the high turnover we're getting, and I know it is across local government, but I do wonder whether the quality of the appraisal, the availability of training so that people can see their career progressing within this same organisation without having to leave. I know the budgets for external training are tight, but I would like to be assured by Paula that the changes we're experiencing in local government, both financial cost pressures and the change in the working environment, where you're not in face-to-face contact with the people working for you so often, is affecting the appraisal system? And if so, what is going to be done about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. But before I ask Paul to answer those points, can I just get Councillor Cole so she can pull them all together in one?
Knock us all off at the same time. I'll try not to duplicate. System to be implemented in 2024 if procured. Why so long? Is that just a budget question? Sorry, just trying not to deal with, oh, yes. 6 monthly review, not mandatory. In services where detailed supervision sessions replace the regular one-to-one meetings, what percentage of staff covered by detailed supervision sessions? And the last thing is what you might call a personal request. I'm partly red-green colorblind, and I can't read that report very easily. The hues that you have used in the reds and the greens look remarkably similar to me. They've all been talking about red and green, but I don't know what they're talking about. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Paula.
So in terms of hybrid working, obviously the data doesn't go back as far as when COVID, the first lockdown happened in March 2020. There is no evidence to suggest that appraisals haven't been taking place beyond the data that you've got. Obviously, it's not 100% in every service area. The data relates to 15-month prior period. So as long as somebody's had an appraisal within that 15-month period, that is noted within the data that you've got in front of you. And during COVID, that was lapsed, I understand, for 18 months rather than 15 months. But there is no evidence to suggest that appraisals were not taking place during that period of time. Of course, the building has been open constantly. So there's, people can come in. I know contact was much harder. And of course, more recently, and certainly since around July time this year, everybody has been encouraged to come back in the building, and people are being encouraged to have team meetings, one-to-ones, appraisals on a more face-to-face basis. So I don't believe that hybrid working, given the council, I believe, started hybrid working before my time in around 2010. So I suspect appraisals probably would have happened on a hybrid way prior to COVID anyway. In terms of procurement and 2024, the reason 2024 is mentioned is because we currently have a contractual arrangement to March 2024 for our HR payroll system. So that would be the final cutoff in terms of implementing a new system. Obviously, we would like to have it in before then, because we want to make sure that we're paying people, but there's a process to happen. So we're currently out to procurement. That procurement process will probably take us around 3 months. Implementation of any HR payroll system can be done very quickly, but we're talking about something that's very important to the council in terms of making sure we get it right. And therefore, a year is probably where we want to be in terms of that implementation plan, hence 2024. And then in terms of the red, amber, green, I guess the point is that if you just look at the figures, and I'm happy to provide you something outside of the meeting if that would be helpful, perhaps more up to date in terms of the figures, then I guess the point is that is the percentage rates that you really need to look at and where we are in September 2022, because that is our percentage rates of appraisals that have taken place in those service areas as of September 2022. And then in terms of I just wanted to pick up on the point around the 33.3% for director and supporting people. It's because there's a very small percentage in some of those service areas. So if you only have 2 people within that service area and 1 person doesn't have an appraisal, then the figure changes. And it could be that they had an appraisal, but just outside of that timescale. And of course, we're now in mid-year appraisal. So we are encouraging people to do their mid-year appraisals. And then in terms of supervision, I will hold my hands up and say, I don't know the percentage fully of the organisation that has supervision. I'm probably looking at Paul Coe now, because I'm guessing that it's mostly in social care, where they have a very extensive supervision programme, and therefore not only do they have appraisals, but they also have a really good supervision programme on top of that, because of the roles that they have. But I will stand corrected if that's not right.
Thank you. Anybody? That's a legacy hand, is it, James?
I might come back on the colour thing. I really was after just to change to the colours.
Yeah. You must have great difficulty
It's
watching.
rag rating. I'm not sure I can change the rag rating colours, but I'm happy to do it in a different format if we do it going forward. Yeah.
You must find it difficult watching the likes of Senegal playing on a green football pitch.
There are other members I know who have the same problems.
Yeah. Don't mean to make light of it, but it's.
I suggest that we just write red, yellow, green at the end of the column for those who are colourblind.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, yeah. Some people can't read either. Never mind. Paula, let me just wrap this up on the point. Oh,
No.
Richard? No, he's just shaking his head. Okay, fine. Let me just wrap this up, Paula. I think you've seen the interest here. That we have. We're in the council is a people business. We're here to serve people. We interface with people, whether you're in place or whether you're in people directorate or resource. It's people, and it's very important. I think a number of my colleagues here will share with me, or have shared with me in the past, a frustration over the years that. I just don't understand how anyone can not have an appraisal. Because I'm an employee, if I'm not having an appraisal, I'm banging my manager's door down to get one, because it's extremely important. So you're absolutely right to focus in on the cultural aspects. So you've got a lot of support from OSMC to do what you're doing, and changing culture and attitude was the hardest thing you can do in any business. So good luck to that. The only question I have left for you is, if I recall right from your May presentation, we were going to be implementing the framework in September, October. You're now telling me it's into the new year. Any reason for that delay?
Well, mainly due to resources in HR and a change in the priorities for HR.
Okay.
unfortunately, due to the fact that I am restructuring my team, but also we've had some priorities in relation to recruitment and retention, then that has to be our focus at this moment in time in terms of making sure that we've got staff that keep our business continuity, keep our customers happy. So we've had to change the focus of what we're doing, but it will happen in the new year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, I do believe there might be a connection between retention and the number and frequency and quality of appraisal. That's all I'd say. If I was a member of staff and I wasn't being appraised, I think, well, they don't value me. They're not interested in me. I'll look for another job.
Yeah, and I do think we may not have a lot of that detailed level of data going back, but I can tell you, when I was last building executive in 2016, we used to get that data. So somewhere in the depths of HR, that data exists, and it was frightening. I'm not going to name and shame anybody, but there are one or two services we're down below 30%. So I think we've seen an improvement, at least in the numbers. Whether the quality is improved is the other question. Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate that. Item 10, we're going to go on to the quarterly financials. First one's revenue. Is that you, Joseph?
Yes, it is, Chairman. Right, just introduce this paper. And on the revenue side of things, we're showing a forecast after mitigations overspend of £1.1 million for the financial year. So that has reduced by around about £1 million since Q1. However, that is heavily reliant on a significant use of reserves, both in the general fund and the vast majority of risk reserves, for example, that we hold as well. Prime drivers of this remain the similar three areas. So the first being inflation. So when we set the budget, inflation was far lower. It's up at 11.1% for October CPI, which is the figure we use for a range of budget review and budget setting purposes. Allied to that is increased demand. So you see, the biggest pressure here is in adult social care on an individual service. So unit costs have significantly gone up there, as has demand coming through. So about a 60% increase on hospital discharges through to the current month that we're looking at the moment. So some pretty major demand pressures, which when combined with inflation, have significantly increased unit costs across a range of our services, home to school transport being another significant area. And then lastly, we still have some of the impacts of the change in behaviour due to sort of the COVID pandemic and people's behaviour around going to leisure centres, for instance, and the amount of car parking taking place, and specifically around season ticket sales, for instance. So those are three big drivers. Allied to that, we have significant, it's been mentioned already tonight, issues around recruitment. And apologies, Chairman, not including the agency table within here, but we have had significant agency costs come through. And just to give you an idea as of the sort of agency costs as a percentage of the staffing budget, we've got 4 service areas where agency represents over 20% of the employee budgets. That's adult social care, communities and wellbeing, and development and regulation, and the largest being in children and family services. So some really quite high numbers of agency use compared to previous years as well, which is mentioned in the report, but I would include this table in for Q3 when that comes through to overview scrutiny commission.
Yeah, thank you. And if you remember, one of the objectives of bringing this to scrutiny before it goes to executive was to pick up things like that. So perhaps you could have that table for the executive. I'm sure if you didn't, there'll be questions asked. Thank you. Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of questions for Joseph. Section 5.26, the 0.6 of a million agency in consultation. I know you've alluded to that and the table is going to follow. I understand that there's a moratorium on recruitment in planning. until the place review is just completed. And that's not going to happen until after the new place director is in post in March 23. If we're having financial impacts because of high use of agency staff now, how long do you see it before it's going to get markedly better? Because, you know, we're talking several months now already, and the place review is not going to be done instantly. So how do you propose to get those costs down? Because if there's a moratorium on recruitment, you know, that's like accepting you can't get anybody, but it's having a direct financial impact on the council and its ability to pay for other services. Also, housing is facing £250,000 of pressures on emergency and temporary accommodation. As I alluded to in one of the earlier debates, Chairman, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, temporary accommodation is full, and we're spending an extremely large amount on hotel accommodation for individuals and families in particular. How long is that sustainable? And what proposals do you have for mitigating that? Given that homelessness in families in particular is likely to increase as the impact of the cost of living increases and rises in mortgages, and also price gouging from private landlords. And I know of several occasions, and I'm dealing with a number of cases in my ward at the moment, where people have been evicted and rents have gone up by, you know, significant amounts because, you know, the rental market is still on the up. So yeah, I'll keep it at that for now. Thank you. Oh yeah, thank you.
I actually have Eric's hand up. You've just taken it down again, Eric, have you? Did you want to address this? Some of those questions were probably directed to you rather than Joseph. Up to you guys, which of the two of you want to deal with it?
If it helps, Chair, I'm quite happy to start, and I'm sure Joseph can help me if I get stuck.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay, Chair?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, perfect. So just to be clear, there is no moratorium on essential planning posts. We are currently going to market to recruit a number of planning posts within development management. And that is to remove the current temporary posts we have, and that's off the back of ensuring we maintain planning performance. And that also includes enforcement posts. So we are in the process of trying to recruit those posts. It's fair to say the market is very challenging at the moment, but we'll see how we get on with those posts. In addition, I've asked the team to consider developing the business case to recruit to the planning policy posts also, so because they are seen as essential for taking us through the local plan process next year. So as I say, there is no moratorium as such on those posts because they are seen as essential for delivering the services. In terms of the wider costs around housing, if I may, I think that's just a reflection of where we are within the economy. We are seeing a number of representations to the council increase. We are seeing additional asks for the housing register increase as well. We are looking to house those who are able to, and we're also looking at other opportunities to try and reduce the demand and the costs for temporary accommodation. So we are looking at other initiatives to try and reduce that burden on the council as well. Hopefully that's been helpful, Chair.
Thank you. Anything to add to that, Joseph?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Anything to add, I suppose, just add to what Eric was saying was just, yes, there's a recruitment freeze in place for most posts, but there are still some essential ones which we are going to recruit to. So if you look at the moment, we've got a significant number we're trying to recruit to in adult social care and children's social care, for example, because we know that the agency cost is far higher in what are absolutely critical and essential posts. In other areas, we're slowing things down by pausing or freezing recruitment for a period of time. But certainly the social care area, as Eric mentioned, in some of the planning posts as well, we would much rather have established post in place there and somebody being post rather than an agency member of staff.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to pick this over this too much. It's a little better quarter on quarter. I spoke to Joseph earlier, and I think the forecast could be reduced to 1.1 million overspend from, I think, what was 2.1 million overspend. But I'm going to quote you now, Chairman, because you used to tell me off when I talked about using reserves. You used to say you can only use them once, as if I wouldn't have worked that out. But we are talking about using reserves here, and I would like to see a table of the reserves going with this report to executive so that we can see quite the impact. If we've got lots of reserves and we say we're going to take 1.1 million to balance the budget out of them, well, okay, it doesn't sound too bad. But if we haven't, we're spending stuff that we can't replace unless we go selling loads of the family silver. So I'm keen to know what the impact is on our reserves, because we're calling on them, and we called on them a bit last year, and I think we're going to be calling on them next year as well. So that's the comments I make in terms in the context of this coming to executive in a couple of weeks' time, Chairman.
Thank you. Joseph, there's obviously different types of reserves I'm sure you're going to comment on. But is that possible to do with what?
I can just cross-reference it back to the budget setting paper that was went to full council, where we highlighted some of those. But I will say that the vast majority of risk reserves and earmark reserves will be utilised if this is the position. So we are in difficult financial circumstances, and are trying to utilise. They are there for specific risk purposes. We have not faced inflation like we're facing at the moment, certainly since the inception of West Berkshire Council for about 40 years. So getting from base point A to B in an inflationary environment is particularly difficult. Now, I hope by Q3, potentially, some of the announcements made in the run up to the autumn statement around adult social care discharge funding, for instance, will help support the position further, and wherever possible, reduce that call on reserves, which ideally I'd like to, of course, as your 151 officer, ideally I'd like to have as many reserves as possible, but of course there's an absolute balance there, but we are utilising a significant number of those to support the in-year position.
But you can, for the executive, produce a table of that. Yeah, thank you. That's fine. Councillor Linden.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I would concur with some of my fellow councillors on this. I can remember, I think it was over a decade ago, where we did have a moratorium on certain recruitment, and obviously we gave priority to adult and children's services. But then we had a problem because we decided to do that entirely in planning, and we got to a stage where our position in terms of reports to the government were going way down, and we could have lost our service. So it's just a reminder. I know things are very tight at the moment, but what we don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. In terms of Councillor Brooks's point on reserves, there are quite a lot of different kinds of reserves, and in this very challenging times, I think it is right that we are providing a table in terms of things squirreled away into quite a number of reserves areas, some allocated or earmarked reserves. So it is vitally important we see what is going on because of the challenges not only we will be facing, but other local authorities as well. Thankfully, we're not in the state of some of county councils who are in serious problem and other upper tier authorities. So I also had a chat with Joseph this afternoon, and certainly he was very positive about the autumn statement that was received, and maybe you might want to briefly amplify this to this committee or commission.
Is that Is that something you can do?
Yeah,
Given that this is a public forum?
yes, I can. Yeah, so the autumn statement is announced a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if I'd say very positive, Councillor Linden, but I think it was slightly better news than we're expecting. We'll receive more information when the final settlement comes out, probably on the 20th or 21st of December. But I suppose that is in the context of that report which went to executive only a couple of weeks ago, highlighting our savings requirement of about £15 million, which is substantially higher than anything that we've been required to save previously, for those reasons I mentioned earlier around inflation and increased demand and the residual impacts of COVID. Potentially compared to the forecast that we had there, there was, we'll have to see what the allocation's like, but potentially there is some relief in there. It is absolutely not £15 million worth of extra money that we're expected to get from central government, but we will find that out in the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Not insubstantial challenges ahead. Anybody else? Joseph, I've just got one thing. I don't know whether I have a misunderstanding on the table or there's an error. If I look at the table on page 7 and I look at the table on page 5, which should be exactly more or less the same. If I look at capital financing and risk management, I see in page 5 I've got a forecast outturn of 13.8 billion. Against a budget of 15.5. I've still got the budget of 15.5 when I go to page 7, but the outturn is now 250,000. And the total at the bottom is rather light as well. Is that just a typo error on the spreadsheet, or do I have a fundamental misunderstanding of what that table's about?
I think that looks like a typo because the mitigated the end forecast is the same.
Exactly.
So I wonder if it's something to do with actually the size of the cell. So let me take that away and
yeah, there's a couple of the cells there, capital financing, and then the total for capital finance and risk management, and then the overall total. Yeah, I think the overall total should read 146,128, as it does on page 5. But okay. That's fine. So that's capital, and you've got guidance as to adding a few bits and pieces for the report going to executive in a few days' time. Now we move on to the capital, please. Over to you again, Joseph.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I'll just get through to that. So again, this has changed somewhat since Q1, so we're trying to reprofile further amounts into future financial years. Again, inflation having an issue, as is sort of supply chain and ability to procure certain projects as when we expect. So there has been some reprofiling. We're trying to do that reprofiling much earlier in the year than perhaps on capital that we have done previously, where we kind of say things are broadly on track, and then by year end suddenly the spend is much lower. But for many of the issues that we face on revenue, we face the same on capital. There is a clear interaction to the point you actually just raised a minute ago, Chairman, around the capital financing line. You see there's a substantial in the revenue side, a substantial benefit, and that's because where interest rates have gone up and we have a lag on the capital programme, we are able to invest that money. An awful lot of it is actually with the Debt Management Office, which is part of the government, but that gives us a far higher interest return than we've had over the last sort of 6, 7, 8 years as interest rates have started to go up. So in an interim, where there is that lag and we hold those cash balances where we're not spending the capital programme, actually there's a sort of short-term revenue benefit to us. But as noted at the front of this in the financial section, we've seen PWLB rates go up. It's mentioned here that the base rate's at 2.25. It's now up at over 3% now, and that's having an impact as well on the sort of PWLB rate that we borrow. So in the long term, we'll start. This is purely the monitoring report, but for the budget that will be before you as members in March, clearly the PWB, well, the PWB rate has gone up. So therefore, there is a decision around what scale of capital programme is affordable within the capital envelope and the percentage of funds that we spend on capital financing, which will be a debate for another time. But I think this report starts to flag some of those issues for future years.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn, is that a new hand or is that a legacy?
Sorry, Chairman. Yeah, it's a new hand. I was just inquiring on certain delays as such. So I noticed there's been a delay with the iCollege because I was on the project board due to the fact that we had delays in appointing a contractor as well as accessing the site. And that is obviously going to be a problem for those students who are in an alternative provision, and it's going to be affecting obviously the build programme. I just wondered if there's any more information on that, Chairman.
I suppose just only to say, so Councillor Linden, as it's written there, we still have that project is going ahead, fully committed to it, and it's been long, as you well know, it's been a long time coming. So we're very positive when it's delivered, but yes, it is facing a delay for the reasons set out in the paper.
Do we know why it's difficult to appoint contractors these days for $1 million+ project?
I will have to get a bit more information on that one, but yeah, we are seeing impacts when we're seeing any procurements come through, especially on construction, and that there is a significant cost increase coming through, and also the amount of construction work which is available as well for other contractors to bid in. So it's part of that wider issue that we face.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Masters-Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a quick one. It is a little bit more, asking for a bit more detail, I think, on what Tony's been asking. In 5.10, item C, the A4 Faraday Road improvements, there's a forecast underspend of 320, which is basically none of the works have been completed. What were they for specifically, Joseph? Do you have that to hand?
I might look to John Winstanley. Oh, he's put his hand up. Was it ready? He probably know far more than I.
John.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, that was for works with the link to the A4 Robin Hood roundabout junction as well. So it's a sort of a combined scheme. So there's two schemes in there that there's an unfortunate delay on. And what we've been looking at is enhanced active travel provision around those junctions. So we've done some studies and we bid for some central government funding, which unfortunately we didn't get. So that's caused a delay while we work out what we can actually deliver. So that's what the delay is. They're a linked scheme. We wouldn't do them independently because that would cost way more. So we wanted to combine them for an economy of scale.
Is there some income from the North Newbury developments as well, John, on that, or is that different?
No, that's absolutely correct. There is Section 106 from the North Newbury development, but we wanted additional funding from the government for some active travel improvements around there, which we didn't get in this round of bidding, unfortunately.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, just a question from me. You may have actually touched on it, Joseph. The reprofiling of 17.9 million. There must be a net cost on that. Have you calculated what that is?
Actually, there's a net benefit and a net
in the short term.
There we go. Yeah, so it's true in there. So we don't apply the capital financing costs until the next financial year. So what happens in this year has a direct impact as to what the capital financing cost is for next year. So if we have a significant reprofiling into the next financial year, we will then pay less capital financing, less minimum revenue provision in 23-24, but assuming all that reprofiling and those schemes take place in 23-24, you then put an extra pressure into 24-25. So you're always a year behind on the capital financing costs. So it's a bit of both, Chair.
difficult to calculate, is it?
Yeah,
You need to know interest rates in a 24 months time.
exactly. I think
Yeah, okay.
as at today, if it was exactly like this, we normally put an additional £600,000 into the budget each year for capital financing costs. I think this figure would represent about 428k. That's quite a specific figure, isn't it? But that's as at today with capital financing as it is today, which it won't be by the time we get to budget.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think we all. Councillor Masters, go ahead. Thank you for letting us know. Okay, thank you. Those two reports are noted. And I now move on to item, what's the number? Item 12. And John Winstanley's been waiting patiently to present his report on local flood risk management strategy 2022-2027. It also outlines the council's duties and responsibilities under the Flood and Water Management Act and provides an update on activities undertaken in the last 12 months on planned flood alleviation and drainage works programmed for the 22-23 year. Also provides an overview of the North and East Thatcham Flood Alleviation Scheme. John, would you please present your report, please?
Happy to. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so this is basically outlines our duties under the Flood and Water Management Act as lead local flood authority. We have a number of duties and responsibilities. The main one, the one that sets a framework, is to produce a local flood risk management strategy, which was approved at executive early this year. So it's this one will run from 2022 to 2027 and is available on the website. That kind of sets a framework as how we go about managing our flood risk, how we include stakeholders, how we the roles and responsibilities, and also where we focus our efforts in terms of the major and flood risks that we have within the district. Unsurprisingly, a large part of our time over the last 10 years or so has been taken in looking at Thatcham, which is where we suffered the most amount of flooding in 2007, and I'll come on to the work that we've done in that area later on. Other duties that we have under the Flood and Water Management Act is to maintain a register of flood risk assets, which we have. We have combined that with our highway asset management system, so that is available to view if anybody would like to look at that. We are working to get that available online, and it's one of our tasks that we've allocated to ourselves under the new version of the local flood risk management strategy. We also carry out works in local flood risk sort of capital work. So we've been quite successful over the years in bidding for DEFRA and Environment Agency funding, probably about 10 million in the last 10 years. So that's gone towards places like Winterbourne, Eastbury, Lambourne, Thatcham, obviously Newbury as well. So we've carried out flood risk works in all these areas, to name a few. And that's all detailed in the local flood risk management strategy. We also have a duty to investigate flood incidents. So under Section 19 of the Local Flood Water Management Act. Fortunately, there's been none in the last year. The last investigations I think we did were in 2016, I seem to remember. So this is, we have a policy within the local flood risk management strategy of where we do investigate. So that's in one of the appendices, and that sets out the criteria for us carrying out investigation. And it basically involves an habitable part of a property that has flooded. We'd carry out a formal investigation. We also have powers under the Land Drainage Act, which has been amended by the Flood and Water Management Act to take on ordinary watercourses, to sort of be the flood risk management authority for ordinary watercourses. So this is anything that's not main river. We also consent works on ordinary watercourses. So if somebody's going to change a drainage ditch, they should come to us for consent. So that's a duty that we carry out. And we've had 14 consents that we've given, or requests, over the last 12 months. We're also a statutory consultee under the in terms of planning. So our drainage and flood risk team are consulted as part of the planning process. They're only consulted for major applications, and we also look at any applications that are in flood risk zone 3 in accordance with the Environment Agency mapping. That's for surface water and for fluvial flooding as well. So, and we've commented on a total of 418 applications in the last 12 months. We also have a duty to cooperate with other risk management authorities. So we regularly meet with the Environment Agency and Thames Water as well, and through our works with other flood forums. And we also attend the Pang Valley, Lambourne Valley and Thatcham flood forums, and have attended the recently convened Newbury Flood Action Group. And also we have a lead role to play in emergency planning and recovery after a flood event. So that is obviously quite critical. Pleased to say that we haven't had anything in the last couple of years, but we know how quickly that can change from previous experience, and we always need to be prepared. And Carolyn Richardson is always also on the call, who manages the emergency planning team, and I'm sure you all know that she's integral when we do have a flood, and is always first to the pump, if you pardon the pun. So those are our main duties and what we've done over the last 12 months. Turning to Thatcham and the work that we've done there, obviously we've completed quite a number of large infrastructure schemes in the Thatcham area. One at Cold Ash that we completed, a flood alleviation reservoir there. Tullway is another one, and we completed quite a large amount of work last year, where we completed a reservoir at Dunstan Park, and a lot of reprofiling and bunds and attenuation features down through Siege Cross, down to right to the south of Thatcham. So throughout Thatcham, we completed a lot of work. We're now working on 3 further attenuation features in North and East Thatcham. We're at the tender stage. So I think tenders are being returned on the 3rd of December. We are also being hit by spiraling costs in the construction industry. So we're talking to the Environment Agency about some additional funding that we need. So that will go to the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee in January. And then hopefully we'll be in a position to start on these schemes in earnest in March 2023. So that'll be 3 further schemes in Thatcham that will protect an additional 600 residential properties from flooding, and also protect some important infrastructure, i.e. our roads and other features as well. And then remaining schemes in Thatcham is Thatcham Memorial Fields, which would be the final scheme of the Thatcham Surface Water Management Plan, and we're hoping to deliver that in 2024. Any questions?
First hand up I saw was Councillor Linden. Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of brief points. Certainly the Chairman and Councillor Sumner and myself on Eastern Area Planning. Certainly it's been very useful, certainly on the site visits that we've attended. So yeah, we're very impressed with what's gone, and in particular the late Stuart Clark, who did a valuable set of work for the council. Sadly, he's died prematurely, but he certainly did a hell of a lot, and I had great confidence in him as an officer to do so. And obviously I'll wait for your I think he did a fantastic job. And also, you referred to you and your team and Karen and Richardson, and certainly when she was involved when we've had floods, she's done an excellent job. And in terms of our resilience forum that we have with our partners like the police and the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, as well as Thames Water. I know had a few challenges there in the past as well. So with Thames Water, so yeah, it's a very good service, and I'd like to congratulate you and Councillor Sumner as the executive member.
Okay, Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I won't take anything away from what Councillor Linden's just said, and I hope John Winstanley doesn't take anything I say as against him or his officers personally, but I've just shared with him the link to the National Infrastructure Forum report today, which I was given a preview of at a conference a week ago. And I think we've really got to get serious about flood risk, and we've got to up our game. I don't know where the resources are going to come from, but just to give you some of the quotes from that report, most properties have a 60% chance of being flooded in the next 30 years. Surface water flooding, which is one of the things we do cover, is what we know least about, but we are much improving our mapping, but it is very localized, which leads us on to thinking we need more flood wardens, we need more local knowledge input to our flood risk management planning. I attended the flood wardens my first of the regular flood wardens meetings. I was the only ward member there. There may be other ward members who couldn't make it or who are flood wardens, but I would recommend every ward member. There is not a ward in this district, I guarantee you, that doesn't have some form of potential flooding. I mean, take my own water, you'd think it's up the top of the hill mainly, but you know, we've got a 1,500 home development coming. We're going to have a lot of suds there. We're going to interfere with the natural water flows. We're going to be demanding a lot of water supply. So, Chairman, what I think we need as perhaps a future job and finish task group is a look at the whole impact of the water cycle on our activities as a council. Stuart, I have so much praise for the man. He was worked off his feet trying to wear I don't know how many hats. You know, we've heard the description, the list of the jobs that we have to cover as a lead local flood authority. We didn't mention highways, but it's why it comes under John, this whole area. There's highway drainage as well. You know, there's too much for one person. We need a really substantial increase in resourcing in flooding. We need more education of planning officers, of planning committee members about the whole water cycle. Some of the things I heard this morning are very pleasing to me personally, but John, it's a double-edged sword if they do sort out Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, because there is a backlog of work on management of suds that badly needs attending to, and what we don't want is for that to be given to a local authority as a responsibility and not the funding that comes with it.
Could I just clarify something you said? You said at the very beginning something, the 60% of homes had a chance of being flooded.
That's what the National Infrastructure Forum
That was my question. Was that national or was that West Berkshire?
National. No, it's very much the national figure.
Do we have West
I
Berkshire?
don't know what it is locally.
Okay.
We need to drill down into the report and the figures. I mean, I'm sure there will be maps associated with their report. But other quotes from the report, the government expects £56 billion will need to be spent on flood risk management in the next 20 years. Another quote, only 1/5 of adults know what surface water flooding means. They don't realise what their what risks they are at. Surveys have been done by the Environment Agency, which you know, you can do a survey of an area that's on the flood risk map for surface water flooding, knock on the doors and say, do you realise your property is at risk of flooding? And some of the people tell you to go away. How dare you say that? Because they're afraid their insurance premiums are going to go up as a result. But really, there is a lot that we can do. We can help our property owners do to protect themselves. You'll never get rid of flood risk. You know, I was a Royal Engineer, as is Caroline Richardson. Before I became a military surveyor, we all had to have basic training in everything from manning the pumps to supply people with fresh water to manning the pumps to put out a fire. That was our role within the armed forces, and I've been trained to support both flooding and fire when the firemen went on strike. So I've learned a hell of a lot since being on the council this time, realising that the risk of flooding has gone up in the time since Tony was first council. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse. So we've got to work with the LGA to make sure that the lead local flood authority role is what it says. At the moment, how can we be a lead authority when we have a budget of a mere 100 million, which we have to spend on all the other things? Thames Water is another one. They've got a budget as big as quite a sizable country. And they deal with a very large part of flood risk in our country. And then you've got an Environment Agency, which sadly is subject to all the funding pressures of other government bodies. And barely can manage to support our flood forums. And I've got a flood forum meeting tomorrow night. So that, I mean, I'd like John to comment on the sorts of things I'm saying about the challenge that we face in this area. And maybe you, Chairman, and others would like to comment on possible need for a job and finish task looking at the floodwater cycle, as I say, and every impact it has on the council.
Let me hear from John first. John, you want to comment on all of that?
Yeah, I'm. Firstly, thank you for the kind words about Stuart. Yeah, very sad indeed. We didn't just have Stuart in the drainage and flood risk team. There is a team there, and a very good one. And of course, as irreplaceable as Stuart is, we will get somebody in to lead that team and lead it well. So that is in hand. We in terms of surface water flood risk, we've done a lot of good work across the district to try and mitigate against that, to try and identify where the flow paths are, and a lot of work with the Environment Agency mapping. So there is quite a bit of information out there on surface water flood, and of course that's not the only risk. That sort of as much of a risk is groundwater as well. That's probably the more difficult one to combat, because you can normally see a flow path for surface water, but groundwater can come up anywhere. So that's probably a more difficult one. But given the funding that we've had and we've been successful in bidding for over the years, I think we've done a lot of good work, a lot of good groundwork. And of course, we have other tools that we've have at our disposal. We've, as part of the local plan, we carry out strategic flood risk assessments. So that ensures that we build in the right places where we can. And of course, we've got surface water management plan for our key flood risk areas. So, and then of course, there's the next phase of work that we can carry out. And I think that's something where we can, really use our flood groups and our flood forums to identify where we should be focusing.
John, can I just come in on this? Because I'm sure, like many of my colleagues, for this last 6 weeks or so, I've been getting it from a large number of residents with local flooding issues, from Streetley School to small sovereign housings up in the Upper Basildon, at Lower Basildon at the junction of Parkwall Lane, which seems to flood every time it rains, really. Lots of those, and I've been dealing with, as you know, Andrew Reynolds on a few of these things. There's a perception out there. Now, this is what I want to ask you to comment on. There's a perception in the public that all this is caused because not just West Berkshire, all local authorities have cut back on gully clearances and drain cleaning. Would you like to comment on that?
I think it's a perception at the moment. I mean, in November, we've had 210% of our normal November rain. So it has rained a lot this month. Combine that with leaf fall, we get it every year, Alan. That would be my comment. I don't think there's, if we give it a few more years and we're getting exactly the same problems, I'd say there's a problem. But I don't think there's a trend that you can't put down to the fact that there's a lot of leaves that come down at this time of year, and we've had a lot of water come down. So I think you'll find most of these cases, we'll get a report, we'll go out there and kick the leaves off the gully, and then it works again. Sometimes we have to clear it out a bit more, but I think that's generally the problem that I'm seeing.
Okay, so the perception that we've had budget cuts over the last few years is not correct?
It's I wouldn't have said it was affecting, or it was of particular concern for what's happening over the last 4 weeks. I think it just had a lot of rain. Yeah.
Okay. Well answered. Councillor Cole, James.
Thank you, Chairman. Completely coincidentally, I had a long conversation with insurers this morning, and I was being told how this risk had gone down and that risk had gone down and so on. But one thing that's gone up is flood risk. It's a different angle, but very much the same thing. Different question. And very brief, the Drainage and Flood Risk Minor Works Programme, I'm picking up on one thing at Blandys Hill in Kimbray. Is that something that we have done, or is it something that Thames Water have done? I thought it was Thames Water.
This is works that we have done. If it's in Appendix B is that, councillor Cole?
Page 194.
Yeah, that'll be, these are our works. These are West Berkshire Council works.
Well, I shouldn't have been crediting Thames Water then.
Okay. That's it. Any other questions of John? John, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you. At least you were warned that you were going to be on, probably late, but nevertheless, I'm sure there have been other things you'd have been preferred doing. But thank you for thank you for waiting, and thank you for.
It was 3-0, by the way, back Alan, if you're wondering.
Thank you for that. For who? Okay. Now, Councillor Claire Rolls is not available tonight because she's ill, so we won't have a health scrutiny update. I'm not quite sure how we'll handle that. Maybe put it on to the next meeting, or ask her to write a short report. Moving on to items 14, then the No. I'll share this, Tony. Thanks. But moving on to item 14, then is the forward plan. Any comments on the forward plan? Anything on there? Given that we're kind of just one more meeting to go, running out.
Good to see it available again in this format. I think it sort of went off our radar for a while.
Yeah. And from next year on, it's going to be a much longer time frame as well to give us time to get ahead on the some of these things, which 6 months isn't enough. Okay. If I can take that, comments on that, and then move on to our own work program. We do have, well, when I was sitting down with Councillor Abbs and with Gordon, trying to schedule, we felt that perhaps we needed an extra meeting. We only had one plan for March, and we put an extra meeting in. The way things have been going with topics in OSMC, they've been slipping, and resources and what have you, I'd like to leave that decision for the extra meeting, perhaps until we get into the new year. If we can do without it, we'll do without it.
Take it offline, as it were, not decide now.
Yeah, we'll let you know if it's needed or not. Yeah. So any other comments? If not, I will close the meeting. And although you've missed the second half, Councillor Brooks, you can get back in time for match of the day. The highlights. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, members. And anyone and officers for attending. I appreciate that. And I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you.